right. Okay. So the first reminder is about next week. We are 1 week away from meeting in person in the class. So as you know, this is a hybrid class. So the expectation is to meet at least once in person this semester. So that in-person class is next week. It is in the designated classroom for this class, which is Lindquist Hall 324. I'm assuming that you all know where Lindquist Hall is. It's on the 3rd floor of Lindquist Hall. And that's, we will meet at 9:30, the same time that we meet in class, but in person next Tuesday. And we won't have class that week. We won't have, like I said, this week is the last week of lectures, but we will have the Undergraduate Linguistics Fest on Tuesday, and we will be hearing from 3 people that day, Caitlin Hemberger and Raul Rangel, and they're both applied linguistics seniors, and they will be presenting on, Caitlin will be presenting on a senior honors thesis, and Raul will be presenting on his capstone project. So applied linguistic majors in the class, it'll be really good for you to kind of get an idea of what your linguistic capstone project should look like, right? Because I know, Landon, you're going to get into the capstone project next semester. Kelly, you will, be thinking of your project maybe, next year, next academic year. So it's really good to kind of get an idea, what it looks like, what's expected and all that. And then Rory Mata, who's a freshman in aerospace engineering, is my first year in research experience mentee. And she's going to be presenting on misinformation in Hispanic communities. That's a research project. So I'm really excited about this. The dean is going to be the dean of liberal arts and sciences. Dr. Andrew Hibbesley is going to be there. He said that he's going to come. And as you know, he is also a linguist. So, he is an expert in linguistics. So it'll be great for you to meet him, all of you to meet him. I've told him lots about Linguistics 151. I always have a special place for Linguistics 151 because the final projects that you do, it really excites me to see what creativity you have. And, I really love teaching Linguistics 151. So, I've told him about the class and the final projects that you're doing and all that. So it'll be really good for you to interact with him as well. And I will be providing refreshments because Caitlin and Raul are graduating with their applied linguistics majors, and they are the first 2 people to graduate with their applied linguistics major ever in the history of Wichita State. So it calls for celebration. So we will have some refreshments. I haven't decided what it is yet, but there will be food to eat. So if you can grab breakfast that morning, you will have food. You won't be hungry, I promise. And then on Thursday, you will be watching a movie, and we go back to the Zoom schedule because I know that a lot of you don't prefer to be in person, and I completely respect that. So we will watch the movie via Zoom on Thursday, April 21st. So that's next week. Mark your calendars for that. And then the week after that is your final presentation in, again, via Zoom. So you have your schedules. If you don't know when you're presenting, if you don't know what date, it's on Blackboard. I've also, talked about it in a previous lecture. And I've also sent you an email about it. So you should be able to find out more information about that. But if you're still in the dark, send me an email or, talk to me during office hours, and I can let you know which day you're presenting. But really what I'm looking for is 8 minutes of presentation. It could be a PowerPoint presentation. It could be a handout. It could be, if you want to pull up your final project and just show everybody, if you don't have the time to make a PowerPoint presentation, however you want to do it. But the expectation from me is that you have about 8 minutes to present in class, and then you take 2 minutes of questions and discussion. And I've given you a gist of what I'm looking for. I want to see your phonetic inventory, your conlang, some words you've created, motivation for choosing the prompt, some background story, word orders, and a couple of sentences and all that. So that's really what I'm looking for. Kelly, I know that you've already created a presentation, like a poster presentation for ORCAP, feel free to just use that for your presentation, if that's easier for you to do. Like I said, my expectation is some kind of visual representation of your language. And so Kelly, feel free to use the same poster. That should work just fine for the presentation. Any questions on your project presentations?
I have a quick question. I know you mentioned having a character sketch. Just to clarify, that can be like a visual drawing kind of sketch, or can it also be like just like a written description?
Yeah, either one or both, or yeah. I mean, I don't expect all of you to be designers and illustrators, right? Like, I mean, I cannot draw for nuts, like, except stick figures. That's the extent of my drawing skills. So, if you know how to draw, if you've illustrated, you have a character sketch, by all means, show us your character sketch. But a verbal description of what your alien looks like, or your whatever character you're talking about in your final project looks like, is all that I'm looking for, right? So yeah, so don't worry about that. And if you have a photograph, some people in the past, my students in the past, have also just Google searched images of characters that they feel fit the bill of their description. If you do that, and that's completely fine to do it, just cite your source of where you've taken the character from, right? Just don't pretend that you illustrated it and you made it. So that's all I ask. But it's completely okay to Google search images as well, if you want. Any other questions on your presentation? Do you all feel confident enough to do the presentation? Yeah? Okay, good. The last reminder before we get into today's lecture is I am teaching a new class. Well, it's not technically new, but it's new in the sense that I'm teaching it at a different level. I'm teaching it at a undergrad level, like a 500 level for the first time. This is language of food. Some of you may have seen this description in the linguistic catalog. At the 100 level, right? So it's usually taught as a 152 class, but I've had requests for graduate students who are interested in taking this class. So I really want to offer it at the 500 level. And applied linguistic majors in this class, I highly recommend that you try to fit it into your schedule, because this is a class that I don't very often teach. And I cannot promise whether it will be offered again before a couple of you graduate in a year or so. So it will count towards your major. It will substitute for a 600 level class. That's a requirement in the major, because I'm not teaching a 600 level class next semester. As you can see, I might teach one in spring of 2022, but I always tell my students, grab my class when I'm offering it, because I cannot promise anything in the future, just not yet, because, I am going up for tenure this year. So there's a lot of uncertainty about when I'm taking a sabbatical, how long I'll be gone, all that stuff. So take language of food if it can fit into your schedule. It's slotted for, I believe, Thursday at 9:30, I want to say. And it's a graduate class, so we meet only once a week. And so we meet from 9:30 to 11:20 or something like that. It's a 2 hour and 10 minutes or 2 hour and 20 minutes class. So we meet only that once a week. It's listed as an experiential class, and I want to say it's listed as a hybrid. It's listed as an experiential class because we will be touring Shawka Hall, or we will be touring some other restaurant on campus or something like that. So there's like a food tour element associated with it. You will be going around restaurants within Wichita, trying to get like menus and stuff to analyze, and all that sort of cool fun stuff. We will be eating food. It's a hybrid class, but we will be meeting occasionally to eat food. But depending on what the situation is for fall of 2022. I will take a call whether this class is in person or it's going to be a mixed class like this via Zoom. And I'll also ask all the students, of course, what they prefer. But I highly recommend this. The name is Special Studies in Linguistics, so you will not see this language of food, which is why I kind of wanted to point out that, you know, the topic that I've chosen is language of food. The catalog says Special Studies in Linguistics, so they have to use that Special Studies in Linguistics title. Okay, so today's lecture and next week, Thursday's lecture is going to be on language and music. And on Thursday, we'll also be getting into sign language, thanks to Kelly, right, Kelly? Okay, because I'm not going to be talking about sign language. Kelly's going to be doing all the work. And I know, you know, a lot of you know sign language already, so you can always chip in and help out Kelly, you know, and teach the non-signers in the class, right? But today we'll be talking about language and music. And I know that, you know, a lot of musicians must be here in this class. Does anybody play music or sing? Or you can raise your hand. If you're not on video, okay. Trinity, yeah. Kelly. Landon says más o menos, maybe. Borderline, okay. Anybody else? A trained musician? Or
I used to be when I was in school. I played the violin from 5th grade until I graduated.
okay.
And then I was in honors choir for 6th and 7th grade.
Okay.
But that's it.
Cool. Yeah, I love the violin. I want my daughter to start learning the violin. She's only 4. She's not even 4, but I couldn't learn the violin. I sucked, so I want her to learn it. Kelly, what do you play? Is it an instrument or?
Well, I played the flute and the piano all through, you know, elementary school all the way till I graduated high school. And then I also was in choir, and then at my church for many, many years, I sang in the band. We had, you know, we have a band, so.
Cool. Wow. What are you? Are you a soprano? Are you a?
I'm a soprano.
Soprano. Yeah,
Mhm.
I could tell from the voice quality. Olivia, what about you? What do you play?
I do mostly piano, and I sing in the choir at Wichita State and also at my church.
Okay, cool. What are you? What do you sing? Are you a soprano as well?
Alto, as low as it
Alto,
goes,
okay.
that's me.
Cool. Anybody else who plays any other instrument or sings? Trinity, I know you raised your hand.
Yeah, I play violin.
Okay, cool. Yeah. That's, you know, so yeah, you guys know, you know, a lot more about the music that I'm going to be talking about today. I am a trained musician as well. I am trained in classical Indian music. I'm a singer. So, you know, language and music has been in my head ever since I was a kid, I want to say, you know, part of the reason why I became a linguist. It's always interested me. It's always intrigued me, how we speak, why we speak, and how we play music or relate to music. You know, even if you are not a musician, I think music is just so embedded in our everyday life, right? I mean, when you're driving the car, you're listening to music. When, you know, you're walking to class, you know, I've seen students with like ear pods and plugged in and like, you know, nodding their heads and like humming and that kind of stuff. So I think everybody has music in their daily life, right? And all of us, right, on this call, we also use language on a daily basis. I mean, there isn't a day in our life when we just shut up and say, today I'm going to be silent, I'm not going to talk to you, right? So we use language and music like all the time, right? Our brains are just processing language and music constantly. So what is the connection between language and music, right? I mean, it's, I think, a very natural question to ask. The relationship is not exactly obvious. I mean, there might be some overlap between language and music, but, you know, there are different kinds of languages, there are different types of music. I know majority of you might be familiar with Western classical music, which is, the tradition of church singing and choir and all that. But there's different kinds of music, and I will expose you to, a couple of different genres of music today. But what is the relationship between language and music? Any thoughts, any preliminary ideas on what might be, an overlap or a similarity between language and music? Kelly?
Well, I know that language has rules, grammar, and music has rules as well. Music also has patterns, which language has. Are those like the types of things you're looking for? Oh, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer.
I did always have a question about tone, though. I had a friend who was like tone deaf, but people can speak tone languages. And so I've always been a little curious about how people can be tone deaf for like music, but not in language.
Right. Is this person that you're talking about the same person who's tone deaf, the person who also speaks a tone language?
No. This was like a long time ago. And then when I, got in college and was learning more about linguistics, I was like, how do people, that are tone deaf do it?
Right. So okay. So the question of whether there is something called tone deafness is debatable. All right. So let's start with that. I don't want to say that I subscribe to that vision. Nobody, I think, in my personal opinion, is truly tone deaf, right? I mean, there are some people who have a ear for music, right? And there are some people who are better than other people. Let's put it that way, right? I mean, there are some people among human beings who speak like 10, 15 languages, right? Now, it's the same kind of thing. I mean, everybody speaks one language, but whether you can speak multiple languages is different, right? It's the same thing with music, I think. That person, who thinks that he or she is tone deaf might be able to discriminate between one or two different kinds of, musical notes, but maybe not the same level as, somebody who's musically trained like Kelly or Olivia or Trinity or Nayel, right? Now, the question of whether, if you consider yourself tone deaf, can you speak a tone language? I think that question is a little bit different, right? I mean, when we speak about languages, we actually speak about, this difference between nurture and nature, right? So if you grow up in, say, China, in mainland China, as an American, right, growing up in mainland China, you probably are more predisposed to speaking a tonal language, right? You may even like pick up Mandarin Chinese, right? Because you just hear that so much in your nature, in your environment, right? Versus music, I think, has that, we're getting into the differences between language and music at this point, right? The difference, I think the biggest difference between language and music is that everybody who hears a language picks up a language, but everybody who hears music does not pick up music, right? I think that's the biggest starking difference between language and music, because as a baby, you're probably exposed to music the same way that you're exposed to language in your mother's womb, right? I mean, your mother probably listened to music. People around you probably listen to music. So you probably were exposed to music quite a bit, but that didn't mean that you became, a musician, right? Versus you probably listened to a lot of English in your mother's womb, and you were such an expert speaker by the time you're 2 years old, right? So there's something fundamentally different about language and music. And I think, Nayel, you're tapping into that fundamental difference, right? With respect to that tone deafness in tonal language.
And I thought that was crazy what you just brought up about, learning things. People like K-pop and, J-pop, and we sing songs in different languages all the time. And I did never think about that before. Like, most of us actually don't learn the language, but we know all the words of the songs and we can pronounce it correctly. But then you ask us to speak it, and it's not there. I never thought about that before. That was really cool.
Yeah.
I have a point that I would like to add, which is that when we're talking about language and music, the word tone actually means something completely different, because when you're speaking a language, those are all relative tones. Whereas when you're doing music, it's all absolute tones. So not being able to determine an absolute tone isn't really going to stop you from learning how to speak a tonal language.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't want to add in too much terminology there, but we are getting into tones, and I will talk a lot more about tones as this lecture slide goes on. But that's a great point, Landon, and completely on the right track. Language has relative tones. Music has absolute tones. They're two different kinds of tones, and if you're able to discriminate one or the other, doesn't mean that you're unable to discriminate the other. Right? Yeah, but we will get into tones a lot more soon. Okay, so we have been focused on language. We know quite a bit about language, how it works, what the different grammatical structures are in language. What does it mean when we say that language is a system of signs? What does it mean to say language has design features, right? But what about music? And, I want to go back to the point that Kelly actually made about the similarity between language and music, that both language and music are rule governed, right? That's a point I think that, it was definitely on the right track. What do we mean by music is rule governed, right? The same way that language is rule governed. Any ideas, any thoughts on that? Kelly, yeah.
It has different signs and symbols that represent different rules or different requirements, I guess. I don't know how to exactly explain it.
Sure. I think what you're trying to say is that, the different notes, the musical notes kind of represent different symbols or different signs in music, just like maybe, Nael, hold on a second. Just like maybe, the phonemes of language. Is that what you were trying to say, Kelly? Yes. Okay.
Yes. Also, as well as the symbols that are used for I don't know, maybe you would equate that to punctuation in a written language, maybe. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I see the similarity of that. Yeah. Nael?
And it's like reading, but there's also, your alto clef and your bass clef, which have different positions for their notes compared to, I don't know if it's called the soprano clef or whatever the normal one is for the violin and stuff, but the alto clef and the bass clef look different from that as well. And their notes are different, but it is just like reading once you start to do it, because it just comes naturally, when you read a book. But it takes a little bit, but yeah, it has all the punctuation in it and the decrescendos and all of that stuff written in it. But there's also different clefs too, so kind of like different dialects.
Sure, different varieties of language. Yeah. When did the musicians in this class? When were you taught to read, a musical score or those kind of musical symbols when you're playing, the violin or piano or something like that? Do you remember?
So I learned piano when I was 6, and that's when I learned how to read bass and treble clef.
Okay.
And I was kind of given a refresher when I learned violin, but I pretty much knew what all the notes meant at that point.
Perfect. So elementary school, Trinity, or was that like a private lesson that you took, or?
Yeah, my parents wanted us to learn. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, sorry. My parents wanted us to learn an instrument, and they decided to give us piano because it's a very good beginner instrument. And then once we got a little bit older, we were able to choose our own. So I chose violin. My youngest brother chose cello, and then my other brother has been trying to learn the trumpet. So we all have piano lessons just as a basic, learn how an instrument works, learn some of the music theory, learn the notes, and then we moved on from there.
Sure. Do your parents play some music as well, or sing, or?
So my mom learned violin, or not violin. She learned piano when she was younger and played it through high school. And then my dad just very recently learned piano, taught himself so that he could surprise my mom for their anniversary.
that's so cute. Was mom surprised?
Oh yeah, well it ended up not being quite on the anniversary because they decided to go out of town. But that Christmas he decided to hold like a little mini concert and he played the piano and he sang to her and it was really sweet.
Oh, that's so cute. I love that story. Thanks for sharing that story. That warms my heart. Yeah, I mean, we talk about how it's so difficult to learn language or music after a certain age, right? Like we often talk about how fluency in language like disappears after your puberty, and you can never learn language with the fluency as you were when you were a baby. But stories like this is so heartwarming to hear. So yeah, that's awesome. Kelly, I thought you were unmuted for a while. Yes.
I was just going to add that in public school, they start teaching you music theory pretty much from the get-go in kindergarten.
Okay. Yeah. So it does that also mean that you're taught to learn how to read and?
Yeah, I mean, the children, of course, I don't think realize that that's what's happening.
Mhm.
But
Sure.
yes, that is what's happening. They're teaching you like the difference between the length of notes, like quarter notes versus whole notes and stuff like that. And then they do also teach you the names of the notes and stuff like that. So
Right.
they start that pretty early in public school.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing that makes me think about why we are not taught IPA, maybe,
Mhm.
in first grade. I mean, we talk about phonics, but that's not the same as phonetics, right? I mean, and the way that phonics is taught in the elementary school is very different from, the IPA and, the elementary, I say elementary, but like introductory linguistic classes that you've taken in Wichita State, and very often I get students who tell me, why were we not taught this in school? And I'm like, well, because linguistics is not taught in schools, but it should be, is my point, right?
Yeah.
So, a capstone project or something to maybe keep at the back of your head is, how would you talk to a 6-year-old or a first grader about IPA, right? Or how would you teach a 6-year-old phonetics, right? I think that's, it's not an easy question, right? It's I struggle to teach university students sometimes, right? Because it's just so different, right? I mean, it's like unwrapping what you know and learning, something that you already have in your head, but it's just me saying, oh, like this is burn, this is burn, this is turd, and then suddenly everything clicks, right? But I feel that if you are taught this way in elementary school, like languages would be so much more fun, language learning would be so much more fun, learning a new language would be so much more fun, and creating a new language, would have been something that you would have done, like, back in elementary school or something like that, right? Yeah, it's really sad, when you think about it. But there's been a push to include linguistics in high school curriculums, I know, but not that I've heard of, none that I've heard of for elementary or middle school. So, and the other thing that really, really bothers me is, why do you start learning a foreign language only in middle school? Right? I mean, that does not make sense to me. Like, it's, you need to learn a new language from when you are 5 years old or 3 years old, right? If waiting until your middle school is like kind of like waiting for puberty and then you fall off the curve, right? So yeah, it's something that has never made sense to me. So if you have children, or if you're planning on having children in the future, teach them another language, basically when they're 4 years old or 5 years old. Like, put them in some class, right? Or teach them Duolingo. I mean, they want screen time, give them Duolingo as screen time, right? That's really my, big take home point. Whenever I teach in all my classes, this is my biggest take home point. Teach your children another language. Okay, so when we talk about music is really old, right? Just like language. I mean, language has been around for a very long period of time as a form of communication. music has also been around for like, many, many years. Every known human community has had music in some form or the other, right? Very often we talk about oral communication skills, especially indigenous tribes, they didn't have any written records of things. They would always communicate orally. And, very often they also had music as an integral part of their community. It's very communal, right? Just like language, it kind of binds people together, especially in, indigenous communities. But when we want to talk about, like Western tonal music or Western classical music, we obviously want to have a general framework to talk about, right? That kind of rule governing thing that Kelly talked about, or, the musical score, the clefs and all that people universally can read if you're learning Western tonal music. So the question is, what makes sound musical, right? Can any music be considered music? I was prepping for this lecture this morning, and I asked my husband was getting ready to go to work, and I asked him something, and I said, do you consider this music, right? And he sang. He does not sing, and he sang, and he said, I even consider this music. He was like, anything is music for me, even the fact that he cannot sing, or so what makes sound musical, right? It's sequences of sonic events. So that's what the terminology, when you talk about music, you want to talk about, sonic events that are designed or selected to produce desired psychological effects, not related to explicit communication. So there's communication, there's music, there's language, right? That is communication, but not necessarily in that particular sonic event that we talk about. But then when we take language and we put that into these sonic events, that is really, what we consider to be music or musical, right? So what are these sonic events, and how do we distinguish between different genres of music, different kinds of music? So these are the terminology when you talk about music, probably familiar to most of you. But we talk about tonality, we talk about rhythm, and we talk about timbre, right? So three of the main kind of sonic events that we talk about with respect to music. When we talk about tonality, we talk about pitch, right? Going back to a point that Niall actually made with tone deafness, when you talk about the absolute tones that Landon actually brought up, we talk about absolute pitch, right? The question of whether absolute pitch exists or absolute pitch, is something which is again debatable and very controversial in musical theory. But when we talk about pitch, what pitch is this music at? We're talking about two things, melody and harmony. Is this music melodious, right? Is it connecting to that pitch and the tonal kind of quality of music? And is it harmonious, right? I mean, church music is a classic example of the melodious, harmonious kind of, musical quality of music. Hillsong, right, was really popular when I was growing up. It was really melodious, it was really harmonious. People really enjoyed singing Hillsong songs, but even just generally church music, because it's tapping into that Western tonal music and that quality of harmonious and melodiousness, right? Rhythm is a relative timing of events. So the beat, right, or the rhythm of that music, is it fast paced, is it slow paced, is it going at a particular rhythm, right? Very often you can connect that to rhythm in language as well. Certain languages are more rhythmic than certain other languages, right? And if you're like me, if you're a bilingual, very often there is also interference from the first language to the second language, right? So very often I have to unlearn some, rhythmic patterns in my first language when I'm speaking my second language, like English. So that's rhythm. And then timbre is the quality of sound produced by an instrumental voice. So the timbre of the violin is very different from the timbre of cello, right? Even though they're both stringed instruments, right? So how can we distinguish music and speech? I mean, when we talk about music, we often talk about vocal music, right? Or instrumental music, but there's always sound. There's some sort of acoustic sound aspect to music. And that's the same thing with speech as well. When you talk about speech, you're again talking about that acoustic kind of, communication factor. Now, there are three main differences between music and speech. Now, speech has a communicative function, right? And I think that communicative function is missing in music. Now, I'm not saying that when you listen to a music piece, when you listen to a classical music piece, you're not evoking emotions and you're not, getting into that vibe, right, so to speak. I'm not saying that, but when we are talking, we're always communicating some information, right? When I'm talking right now, I'm communicating information that is relevant to you for your final exam, right? There's like an end goal associated with this lecture, right? So that musical communication aspect looks very different. I mean, obviously, going back to what Trinity said, like Trinity's dad learned piano to communicate something to Trinity's mom. So there's, communication, but in a very different interpretation of communication, if you will. And speech also has rhythmic aspects that are musical. Like, for example, poetry is, I think, the closest that you can come to that rhythmic kind of aspect of music with language, right? And there are, again, different genres of poetry. I know there are creative writers in this class, so that could be, an interesting topic for you, especially if you're a poet, to kind of look at rhyming patterns, right? And different kind of rhythm for poetry overlapping with rhythm in music. And then there are also borderline cases. And I'm going to show you 3 examples of borderline cases of music. And I will let you decide whether these are musical pieces or not. So the first is an ambient mix. So this is a trance music. How many of you like trance music or listen to trance music? Okay, 1. Anybody else? You can raise your hand. Trinity, Kelly, okay. How many of you don't like trance music?
I don't know if I would consider like the ambient music I listen to trance music, because I don't know if I've ever like typed in trance music on my Spotify, so I'll find out. But I could be thinking of something like a little bit different.
Okay, well, let's listen to this one. Okay, so trance music pieces are really long. As you can see, this is about an hour long, so I'm not going to be playing the whole thing, but is that music? Okay, it didn't have any, the classic melodies or the classic harmonies that we talk about when we talk about music, but you would still consider this music, right? I mean, it's very different. It's very monochromatic, kind of that kind of one note, one palette, one kind of thing. No, contrast, no kind of zigzags or something. But a lot of people listen to trance music. A lot of people like it because it helps them focus, I think, especially like when you're trying to, not get distracted and try to finish up a work or an assignment or something like that. I've heard a lot of people tell me that they really like trance music. Now, the other musical piece that I wanted to ask you if it was music is this. Have any of you seen something like this before? Okay, this is the Tibetan singing bowl. So if you're familiar with Tibetan Buddhism or, Tibetan culture, you might have seen this. So let's listen to this. So is that music? What do you think? Kelly shaking her head. Anybody else? What do you think? Is it music or not?
I think
Yeah.
that it's
Trinity?
kind of, I think that it's more just them trying to demonstrate the bowl and not really trying to create music. Because I think one of the things that makes music music is the intention of making it music, if that makes any sense.
Sure, the musical aspect of music, right? The sequence of sonic events, if you will. Okay. Anybody else with thoughts on this?
I mean, just to kind of piggyback on Trinity, yeah, it doesn't have the sequence or the rhythm. So I feel like it is an element of music, but in and of itself, that is not music, it's sound, but not music.
Okay. Okay. I think the class is in agreement. I don't see any other person saying, no, 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 this is music. So now I want you to hear, do you all know who's John Cage, or have you heard of John Cage? Olivia says yes. Okay. John Cage is one of America's famous musical composers. And he has a famous piece called 433. Okay. So I want you to listen to that and then we can talk about whether that's music or not. Okay.
And now a performance of John Cage's 433. Please welcome our soloist, William Marks.
I know you have a lot of thoughts. So, is that music?
Technically, I would say yes. I mean, it is a sequence. It is sound and sequences and timing. It's got rhythm, I
Mhm.
guess you could say.
It's a famous piece, right? I mean, it's one of John Cage's most famous compositions. Okay, so we have to evaluate it in that, context, I think. Obviously we live in 2022, but this song was not created in 2022, right? When, the world looks very different now. But Olivia, what do you think?
I would kind of go back to what Trinity said on the last one, like it has elements of music, but I wouldn't consider it music myself. But I'm sure there were people in the audience who were just like moved so much by it. So to them, it might be, to me, it's not necessarily.
Okay. I liked how you said that this is the song that you would choose if you had to do a recital. But it's not easy to hold your hand like that with the timer. Like, I was like, oh my God, like just looking at him, my hand was aching. But Landon, thoughts?
I mean, I think about the fact that, this piece was obviously designed to push the definition of music as far as possible. So it's designed to be provocative and to give us something to talk about like we're doing right now. So obviously it's doing its job, and that's something that really only music does, is it like makes you think and like gives you something deep to talk about.
Yes, yeah, I absolutely agree. And John Cage, like I said, the context in which this song was composed, right? He was a post-avant-garde kind of musician. So there's, avant-garde music, and then there's post-avant-garde kind of music, right? So it's kind of like in the same tradition of Cubism or Dadaism, if you're familiar with those kind of theoretical traditions in art and artwork, right? So I think we should treat this composition the same way that we would with artwork, right? I mean, art also has the provocative, thing that Landon kind of talked about. Some people don't like postmodern art, right? Some people are really traditional, like if you go to a Van Gogh museum or a 18th century, 19th century kind of music tradition, art tradition, people are like, oh yeah, that's Victorian art and Renaissance and all that stuff. But when you go to a postmodern kind of museum, everybody's like, oh my God, like what the hell was he thinking, right? Or what was he eating, right? Or what was he on when he did all this piece and stuff like that. So I think John Cage's kind of composition is in the same kind of tradition, right? Now we are still so new, like the time hasn't elapsed as much between when John Cage composed his music piece and now, but imagine 100 years from now, right? Or 75 years from now, maybe people would have the same kind of appreciation as we would with Renaissance and Victorian art and that kind of thing. So I think art and music in that sense is kind of, really timeless, right? So that's why I call these borderline cases, because some people consider ambient music as still music because there's still notes, but then when you get into Tibetan singing bowl, it's extremely minimalist music, as I like to call it. And then John Cage's 433 is just pushing the extreme boundaries of what music is, okay? So this is John Cage's score, 3 movements, as you can see, and this was the original John Cage's score with his original signature, as you can see. And he says, this was written for a piano, but it can be performed by any instrumentalist or combination of instrumentalists and last any length of time, right? So it was performed for the first time in 1952. The 3 parts are 33 seconds, and then 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and then 1 minute and 20 seconds. So that's kind of the score for John Cage's 433. Okay, so when we talk about music, we often talk about the x-axis and the y-axis of music, right? We want to talk about music in that particular two-dimensional kind of space. The vertical dimension is the tonal quality or the pitch of the music, and the horizontal dimension is the time or the beats, right, of the musical piece. So vertical and horizontal, tonal quality of pitch, and time, which is beats. So here is a graphical representation of the horizontal and the vertical dimensions of music. So like I said, this axis, the x-axis is the tonal quality. It talks about pitch or the spectrum of music, and the time, the vertical, the horizontal axis or the y-axis is the time. That's the beats or the seconds of the music. And this score kind of shows you the succession of the events, the succession of the sequence or the sonic events and the changes that happen in this particular musical score. This is taken from Stephen Malinowski. So if you can, if you want to Google search Stephen Malinowski, he also has a ton of other cool stuff on his website. And you can see that, depending on the density or the complexity of the music, you can also kind of create these, kind of graphs. So this is the musical score, as you can see, and then you can kind of generate these visual representations or graphs of the musical pieces without the, the individual kind of clef symbols and all that, because not everybody can read musical score, right? It's kind of like not everybody can read all the different written scripts of language, right? But you can still understand or listen to those kind of pieces. The same thing, this kind of graphical representation. So this kind of graphical representation is called the music animation machine. And I want to show you Bach's Brandenburg Concerto in that particular kind of musical representation. might have just closed that instead of opening it. Okay. Or this might get me to that link that I just closed. Maybe not. Huh. No. Is that the search? Okay. No. This is why you shouldn't accidentally. Oh wait, it's this one. I think. Okay, there we go. Oop. You get the gist of what's happening, right? I mean, it's again a 4-minute 38-second video. So I will put the the link in the chat box. But you saw how that kind of representation is really, it's as a visual learner, like for me, I really like that. Even though, I might not be able to read as a lay person, if I'm not able to read musical scores, you're still able to appreciate that kind of, moment and the crescendos and, things like that. So I really like the, the way that the music animation machine actually represents music. So I wanted to show you that. And let's talk a little bit more about the horizontal dimension and the vertical dimensions of music. So the horizontal dimension is the time aspect or the beats aspect of music. And we often talk about two kinds of temporal changes in music. One is the melody of music. It's a temporal patterns of pitches, right? How does the pitch change happen within the sequence of sonic events? That's melody. Okay, and the other temporal pattern that we talk about in the horizontal dimension of time is cadences, right? Or the temporal patterns of events within that particular piece. Now, I'm not, this is not a class on music theory. There are other classes at Wichita State that does that, but I have a link here. If you want to learn more about the horizontal dimension of music or other things about, cadences and melodies. So I highly recommend that website, especially, with respect to musical phonology. So that's a lecture that I kind of have, linked. I put that in the chat so you can, view that at your own time at home. But depending on these kind of different melodies and different cadences, we get different kinds of genres of music. Okay. So each culture has a different musical possibility, and each culture has a different focus, right? Now, Western symphonic classical music, which is what we've been hearing in, Bach's Brandenburg Concerto Third, is a chord progression. Right, there are different chords of music, and they progress at a different fashion. Therefore, you get chord progression focused. Very similar to Western symphonic classical music is rock music, which is also a chord progression, especially with the guitar, the strumming of the guitar, right? Strings in rock music. How many of you like rock music or listen to rock music? Okay. I'm a huge fan of rock music, but I think it's also dependent on the generation. Like older generation, I feel listen to a lot more rock growing up, right? Versus like the hip hop that's more in fashion these days, I think. Two other kinds of focus that musical genres can take. One, melody focused. Two, rhythm focused. Okay, so depending on whether you are a melody focused musical tradition or a rhythm focused musical tradition, you actually get different kinds of musical genres. Melody focused, a classical example of this is the traditional fiddle playing. So the fiddle, that kind of fiddle playing is melody focused. Armenian flute music, if you have heard of, flute music from Armenia, that's melody focused. And the Indian ragas, so the Indian classical tradition that I'm trained in, is melody focused as well. Very different from classical music. Have you heard of any kind of Indian music? I'm not talking about Bollywood music necessarily. So, have you heard of Indian classical music? Yeah, okay. Very different sounding, a lot of focus on vocal music, right? So we, I'm pressing my throat, but really we sing from the stomach. The music actually comes from the stomach all the way up. That's kind of what we focus on. So there's a lot of emphasis on breathing. There's a lot of emphasis on meditation to kind of get into the right headspace with respect to singing Indian classical music. I can, recommend a couple of musicians if you're interested in checking them out. So one of the more contemporary Indian musicians who's really famous right now is T.M. Krishna. He is, I want to say he's in his late 40s or early 50s. So, he's really contemporary, I would say. But he also has a lot of understanding of other kinds of music traditions, and he's really Indian classical music in India is very caste-based. I don't want to get too much into that caste-based system, but for a longest period of time, only people from the upper caste could learn Indian classical music, and the lower class and caste people could not even learn it or listen to it, and there was a lot of those kind of things going on. But T.M. Krishna is actually kind of working to go against that kind of traditional thinking of music, and he's he has a school where he teaches kids from lower income and under the poverty line music and that kind of thing. So I really respect him as a musician, and you can just Google, like search him on YouTube, and there's a lot of videos that pop up. Rhythm focused, very different from melody focused and very different from chord progression, is pretty much the music of Africa, right? So African drumming, if you've listened to African drumming, that's rhythm focused. And music from Senegal is very rhythm focused. I know that a lot of more recent hip hop music has African focus, right? I mean, I've been hearing a lot of those kind of fusional pieces these days. So you can see how different it is, especially when you compare it with, the classical music tradition that's well known in the US. So different kinds of musical tradition. I'm not going to show you videos of these, but you can just Google search or, search on YouTube or Spotify or something, and you can listen to a couple of these musical pieces. Harmony in music is also, really, really important, especially for, comprehension of musical sequence of events. And it's actually these harmony or the harmonious, element in music that actually lets us build up representations of music in our brain, in our cognition, and also expectancies, right? Sometimes you hear a particular note and you kind of expect another note to follow from that, right? That's harmony, in a gist. So you can obviously, mismatch that expectancies, and then you might not think it's music, or you might think it's moving away from grammatical musical patterns, right? And those kind of things. And you also have constellations of pitches, so like intervals in music and chords, as in the chord progression of classical music, as well as sound texture, which is the timbre. So all these together give you the harmony that we talk about in musical sequences. So I have, a list of the terminologies with respect to the auditory qualities of music perception. We talk about pitch, we talk about timbre, we talk about loudness, we talk about organization, rhythm, and the semantics of music, because like I said, it evokes emotions, right? I mean, I'm more familiar with the Indian raga tradition, but there are certain ragas that we talk about which evokes emotions of sadness, emotions of happiness, emotions that are a mix of the two, and things like that. There are also certain ragas that we only sing in the morning, certain ragas that we only sing in the evening. So there are shades of ragas, this color, in some sense associated with these kind of ragas. So I'm not going to go into details about all these, but it's kind of, I think, useful as a roadmap, right, to understand music perception and cognition. Like I said, there are different classes at Wichita State that you can take if you're interested in music, especially in the School of Music. So you can kind of maybe even have something that counts towards your applied linguistics major, because it's supposed to be an interdisciplinary field. I was actually working on a language and music certificate. I'm still working on it. It hasn't kicked off, but it's in collaboration with the School of Music, and we were trying to kind of cross-list some classes with music, because they teach IPA as well. A lot of music professors actually teach IPA because you need to learn that speech sound aspect if you are able to sing in another language or learn other genres of music. So there's a lot of overlap between linguistics and music, if you ask me. So that's something that I would highly recommend if you're interested in doing music as maybe an elective in your applied linguistics major. So how are we doing on time? Oh, we're almost out of time. Okay, so let's stop with this table. So I want to compare language and music from our discussion of today. So I think we can kind of divide language and music up into basic sound units with a one-on-one or a near one-on-one mapping with phonemes and notes. So phonemes are kind of similar to musical notes that we talked about. The vocabulary, in language, we have letters and IPA and the alphabet, and in music, we have octaves, right? And, that's, I think, very similar to IPA. Both language and music are grammatical, right? So grammaticality aspect, it's quite similar. Production, obviously, that's, I think, the biggest difference between language and music. So every human child picks up a language, whatever language that may be, but not every child picks up music, right? Or there are different fluencies of music, even though you've been exposed to music for, very long periods of time. Interpretation, language, there's a social contract. So people who speak the same language understand pretty much, the meaning in a similar way. But music, I think, is open to interpretation. That, what I hear when I hear Bach's Brandenburg Concerto is not the same as what, any of you would hear. There's this, interpretation. It's open to interpretation. Language has a communication function, but I think music has more of a pleasure or an entertainment function. It's not really communicating information. It's not really communicating, anything similar to what language does. So I think that's where the pleasure entertainment function comes in. And the building blocks of language and the building blocks of music are similar but dissimilar. Phonemes, morphemes, syntax, notes, chords, and phrases. Right, so very similar in the syntax, or very similar in the Lego kind of building blocks that we talk about, but obviously, they're different, but similar at the same time. right? All right, I think this is a good place to stop. Any thoughts or Trinity? Yes, you can stay on the line and we can talk. Any end notes? Any, Kelly?
I just wanted to mention, you had mentioned Hillsong earlier, and my church, which is in Augusta, Kansas, has actually had Hillsong musicians come and workshop our band. And I got to perform with them, which was fun. And we also did that with the music director and the music team from City Point Church, which is another mega church in Australia, but it was fun.
Congratulations, you are a celebrity. I did not know.
Why not?
Well, maybe on Thursday you can also sing a song for us. I mean, sign language and music. How about that? Hey, I have a better idea. There are a lot of musicians in this class. We can have an end of the semester concert, like a mini concert.
Hey, I'm down for karaoke. Let's do it.
I mean, I was going to say, Olivia was probably going to say, yeah, it's going to be like the recital of John Cage, right? I mean, we can all just sit in silence, right?
Yeah, dibs on that one.
Yeah, cool. All right, so we'll see you on Thursday when Kelly is going to be our esteemed guest lecturer in class, and we're going to learn some sign language. But Kelly, first I'm going to continue with this lecture slide and finish up this lecture slide, and then I will give you some time. So aim for 20-30 minutes is what I think would require me to finish up the lecture slide. So all right, I'm talking too much. Bye. I'll see you all on Thursday.